I think just recognizing, and something I may not have learned early as I should have perhaps, that issues, particularly when you're considering legal issues, they're not always black and white. Sometimes they are, but in some cases, there's need to sort of assess risk and help clients assess that risk. And then they can make informed decisions about where they fall sort of on the risk spectrum in terms of how conservative they want to be on an issue or where they want to potentially be more aggressive as they consider all the factors that they're facing from a business perspective.
Welcome to Behind the Screens, Conversations with Background Screening Pros. I'm Les Rosen, your host, and I'm excited to have you here. On this podcast, we chat with the people who know the background screening world inside and out. Executives, industry experts, legal pros, and more. We dive into their personal stories and insights to give you a real look at what's happening behind the scenes. Whether you work in the screening industry or are just curious, Behind the Screens bring you the real, unfiltered conversations from the people who make it all happen. Stick around for stories you won't hear anywhere else. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, Les Rosen here, and welcome to another action-packed, exciting episode of Behind the Screens, talking with background screening pros about not only the background industry, but about their experiences and lessons learned and advice for the future. And today, it's a pleasure to have a real gentleman with us, a fantastic lawyer, a very private person, well, a person that deals in privacy. I don't know how private he is, we'll find out. A gentleman who I think a lot of you know if you attend PBSA sessions and attend the sessions on FCRA compliance and privacy and international privacy. My pleasure to welcome to the program, Mr. Kevin Coy. Kevin, welcome. Thank you.
Hey, Les. Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. Great to be with you today.
It's great. So instead of me talking about you, let me have you talk about you. Tell us what you're currently doing this day. I forgot to mention that you're with the firm of Arnall Golden Gregory LLP. We'll talk a little bit more about that firm throughout the program a little bit because of the history of that firm and PBSA. But tell us what you do, what your role is, and what do you find most interesting about it?
Oh, sure. Well, I co-chair the firm's Privacy and Cybersecurity Practice, and I'm also a member of the firm's background industry team that supports background screeners sort of across issue areas. So not only my area of privacy and cybersecurity, but other issues where screeners need support, whether that's employment law or IP or other issues. We have a team initiative so that we can support across issue areas. And so I participate in that team as well as co-chairing the Privacy and Cybersecurity Practice. It's an interesting area because it's a lot of new developments as technology advances. Privacy takes on increased importance over time, certainly much more than when I started, in part just because of how technology's moved over the years. And that keeps it interesting and exciting.
Well, if anybody wants to know the length, extent, and breadth of what you do, I would direct them to your LinkedIn profile. But it just really blows my mind the number of things that a privacy attorney, I mean, not only the Fair Credit Reporting Act, the FCRA, there's Graham-Leach-Bailey, GLB, the Driving Protection Privacy Act, HIPAA, all sorts of state laws. And then, you get to the international laws. You not only have the EU GDPR, that does not come triply to the tongue, but you have Canada's, I love this name, PIPEDA, at least that's the way I say it, and, another 100+ country privacy laws. So my question is, when do you get any sleep trying to keep up with all this?
Well, there's a lot to keep up with, but it's a very interesting area. Can't be an expert in everything, but we've done a lot of work in a lot of different areas over the years. And so it is a very dynamic space and a lot of opportunities to do things. As you mentioned, FCRA is part of what I do and something that I've done pretty much my entire career. One of my first memos was on FCRA issues when I was first starting out as a new associate, and it's sort of carried forward from there. But as you say, I do a lot of other privacy work, a lot of other screening work, something of a privacy generalist, trying to help clients in different sectors, not just in the screening space, with everything from privacy policies to compliance questions to contract negotiations and due diligence, all sorts of things.
And then you have risk and cyber and breaches and what to do with AI and
yeah, AI is certainly a hot area now. A lot of attention there. Doing a number of talks in the next few weeks on AI issues as they have impact on different industry sectors, and it makes it for an interesting opportunity.
So that's a new big thing, yeah. Yeah, I remember just starting out in the background industry back in the late 90s, and just when they had amended the FCRA, and none of this existed hardly. I mean, I remember writing an article, one of the first articles out there that I saw, the FCRA in 4 easy steps. Now it's the FCRA in 125 extremely complicated Byzantine steps. Boy, things have sure changed. So what is it? What was your path to get to where you are now? I mean, you didn't spring full blown as a privacy expert. So what happened to you? Where'd you go wrong or right? I don't know.
Wrong or right, depending on how you slice it. I actually fell into privacy law, unlike today, where a lot of law schools have privacy classes and privacy and technology tracks. That wasn't really yet a thing when I was in law school, and privacy law never really occurred to me. While I was in law school, I was working for a small nonprofit as I was waiting to pass the bar. But unfortunately, working for a small nonprofit and being low man on the totem pole doesn't lend a whole lot of job security. And so that opportunity came to an end. I needed to earn some money while I was looking for a full-time job. So I decided to seek some legal temp work to bring in some cash. My first assignment was with a privacy attorney who shared space with the placement firm. One of his partners owned it. That was Bob Belair. Bob hired me as a temp for 6 weeks and then brought me on full-time. And I practiced then with him for the next 20 plus years in a variety of firms and settings.
Oh, that's fantastic. And for those of you that may not remember back to those days, Bob Belair is one of my personal heroes. Back in the day when PBSA, then PBS, was just getting started, we had our very first day in the Hill, not the big thing that's done today, but 5 or 6 of us. And Bob was one, as I recall, who set us up with meetings at the Federal Trade Commission, which at the time was issuing the letters. And it was extremely critical to what background firms were doing, as well as some other agencies and meetings in the Hill. And I've always been grateful for Bob for that, and along with other attorneys at your firm. So, and Bob's retired now, right?
Yeah, Bob's retired, but yeah, Bob very much a pioneer in the background screening space and the privacy space more broadly. So I was very fortunate to have been able to practice with him for most of my career.
Plus, he's a great guy. I mean, and yes. Fun too.
Yes, absolutely. He'd have better stories to tell than I do.
All right. And so now I just say AGG, right?
That works.
So now at AGG, you chair the privacy practice, and you're involved in the background practice as well.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Okay.
And that keeps me pretty busy.
Yeah. And also, speaking of AGG, our good friend and Montserrat Miller, who unfortunately passed in 2022, did a lot of work with PBSA, is also one of your partners, and I think co-presented with you on occasions.
Yes, we miss Montserrat very much. And
I mean, she was wonderful. And it's one of those tragic things. But at any rate, you just mentioned law school. I mean, in looking at your LinkedIn page, so you went to Georgetown undergrad, right?
Yes.
And then Georgetown Law School.
Yep,
and then you've been working in. Have you ever been outside of Washington, D.C.?
I have, actually. I was born and raised in Michigan. I grew up in a small farm town there. The town, when I was growing up, was just over a block long. It's a farm town, so the grain silos dominated our skyline. Town was about a block and a half when I was growing up. There was a growth spurt later in the 90s, though, and up to about 2.5 blocks. Depending on how you count.
It just bloomed.
Right. Yeah, we had a growth spurt. Grew up there, came to DC for school. I've been here pretty much in DC pretty much since then, with the exception of about 18 months when I was in Dallas working for that small nonprofit that I mentioned.
Wow. And then you've been, to use modern parlance, you truly have gone to school and have lived in practice basically in the swamp. Right.
Yes. I'm not in DC as we're talking today, but I have a marsh behind me. So I'm down near where the Potomac River hits the Chesapeake Bay, and there's a marsh behind me. I'll let the viewers and the listeners draw from that any analogies
Right.
that they want to
Of
make.
course, actually, historically, D.C. was a physical swamp when they
Yes.
first started to build
Yes,
there. So,
yeah, a lot of the city was swampland before it was drained to build.
so looking at your career path and what you're practicing now, is there a lesson you learned early that still sticks with you today?
In terms of a lesson, I think just recognizing, and something I may not have learned early as I should have perhaps, that issues, particularly when you're considering legal issues, they're not always black and white. Sometimes they are, but in some cases, there's need to sort of assess risk and help clients assess that risk, and then they can make informed decisions about where they fall sort of on the risk spectrum in terms of how conservative they want to be on an issue or where they want to potentially be more aggressive as they consider all the factors that they're facing from a business perspective.
Right. Yeah, I think those of us who are both lawyers and business people have often observed that the legal advice that is most sound and most protective and most conservative is also the worst business advice. So it doesn't.
Yeah, sometimes it can be tough. And when I was younger, I may have been more definitive in some cases in terms of saying no than that. The firm's practice, AGG's sort of catchphrases, as it were, is not if but how to try and help clients work through those things. And that sort of I always appreciate that because it ties back to that sort of earlier career lesson in terms of trying to help clients navigate those gray areas.
So looking back at your career, I mean, sort of top of mind, is there a particular accomplishment or achievement that stands out in your mind and say, wow, that was a good one, or that's something, worth telling the grandkids about, sort of thing?
Oh, I don't know about the grandkids piece of it, but I've just enjoyed working with clients over the years and helping them sort through issues and, find a path forward. It's one of the things I like about private practice is, being able to represent a number of different clients and, picking up different things from different clients and sort of taking that and melding that. And it also helps me give advice to clients because, there's more perspective in terms of what others are doing. And I've always liked that part of the practice.
So a quick question off the script. Living in D.C., have you had a chance to see any political superstars or headline grabbers, people names we recognize? As you walk down the street to go to various restaurants?
Not recently, but sometimes my office is a few blocks from the White House. We're a little farther now than we used to be. But we used to be a block from the White House complex. So when you're out walking around, you might see reporters or government officials. Seeing the president is less often and less likely just because of the security bubble that is always around the president wherever he might be. But other staffers and reporters, and you just sort of potentially do a second glance to say, oh, is that so-and-so? Yeah, I think that might be so-and-so, without trying not to be fanboyish about it in terms of.
Right. And what's your favorite restaurant in D.C.?
Favorite restaurant in D.C.? That's a good question. There's a small Ethiopian restaurant in my neighborhood, which is very good. And just a couple blocks away, so it's an easy walk. But DC has a wide choice of restaurants, from steakhouses to seafood places and everything in between, given the city's sort of international profile. So whatever you have a craving for, you should be able to find it somewhere in the DC restaurant scene.
I remember when that first PBSA or PBS Hill Day I mentioned, Bob, when Mr. Belair was guided us around, took us to, I can't even remember the name of the place now. It turned out it was a private club and a lot of politicals there. So that was fun.
Oh, yeah. I think that probably one of the party clubs on Capitol Hill would be my guess.
Yeah, I think it was. I can't remember the club or the party. I just remember it was a party, but I don't remember much more detail than that. All right. Well, listen, now at this point, we have a quick game we play sometimes called Changes and Challenges. And just real quick, top of mind, what's been the biggest changes you've seen in the past 15, 20 years and what you think the biggest challenge is going forward?
Oh, well, looking back over sort of the scope of my career, when I first started, privacy law in the U.S. and to some extent globally, was far less developed than it is
Right.
today. FCRA also in a different place than it is today. I started in the mid-90s, the late 90s, similar to when you did, Les. And
Yep.
when I started to practice, the 1996 FCRA amendments had just gone into effect and were just coming online in 97. So there were lots of questions about how do all these new changes to this 1970 statute work. But obviously since then, big changes in terms of further amendments to the law, to the approach that the plaintiff's bar has taken to the law, and also how the states have found new ways to legislate that affect the screening industry, notwithstanding the preemption provisions in the FCRA, so that it's a much more complex tapestry of laws and regulations than it was really when I was first starting out. And then I think the other thing I would just add on that is just sort of the technology changes.
Yeah.
As technology continues to evolve now with the growth and launch of generative AI, lots of considerations there. Earlier in my career, well, when I was first starting out, faxes were still relatively common. And it was the shift to the internet for research, for report preparation, for communications more generally. Oh, how is this going to work? How is this going to affect the screening space? That's continuing today, but just with a different flavor that I think will, the industry is made and remade as technology advances.
Yeah, and there's always something new. Sometimes it's old and it's been reshuffled. So I've been around long enough, so everything old is new again. So I see people coming out with stuff. Yeah, well, we tried that 20 years ago, but who knows? This time it might work. So lots of fun stuff out there. Well, let me ask you, one of the places people probably know you from, if they're not a client of your firm, they know you from the PBSA conferences and the various topics and panels and you talk on. And there's a mid-year coming up, and we don't know who the speakers are, but if you might have a session there, I don't know. What's been the role of PBSA in your practice and your career for you?
For me, PBSA and NAPBS before the rebrand, been a part of my practice and the firm's practice for many years. I've been pretty actively involved for probably a little over a decade now. Mm-hmm. And I'd been involved to varying degrees before that. You mentioned some of the early work that we did that Bob spearheaded, as well as the work that Montserrat did as well. And that's always been a factor. It's an important opportunity to network, to meet clients, meet prospective clients, talk about industry issues, also talk with other lawyers in the space. And it's been a very good opportunity to focus on the background screening parts of my practice.
Yeah, I remember a couple of years ago, you were one of the three amigos of international privacy. You, Kirsten Baggis, Andy Hellman, right? And
Andy and Kirsten are both great. It's always fun to present with them on issues. In terms of PBSA presentations over the years, I've done a lot of international presentations with them together, with them separately, with others from my firm or elsewhere, as well as domestic issues, FCRA issues and the like. But a lot of international is my most
Do you
frequent.
get a chance to travel internationally in addition to focusing on the international privacy rules?
Yes, some for work and more for personal. I love to travel, so that's a passion of mine. So I try
quick,
to
favorite country?
Favorite country is hard, Les. I think I would say, I'll broaden the question a little bit, lawyer style. If we're talking about sort of cities from an urban perspective, my favorites outside the U.S. probably are London, Cape Town, and Sydney. And from a natural scenery perspective, stepping away from the cities, New Zealand, Antarctica, and Brazil.
Wow, you have traveled widely. You've stepped foot on Antarctica, huh?
Yes, did a trip, actually spent the night on the continent.
Wow.
Did a trip down there about 15 years ago. One of the activities one night was to go on to the continent and pitch a tent and sleep there overnight. Fortunately for me, my tent mate was much better at putting up the tent than I would have been. Right. Otherwise, it may not have ended well. But it was a great experience. So
you were a pioneer, because now you go to Antarctica on these big cruise ships. They take you there for the day, and there's a buffet before you go and a buffet when you get back. It sounds like they actually said, "Hey, there's Antarctica. Here's a tent. We'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah, it wasn't nothing quite to that extent, but I did really enjoy the nights on the continent. That was an optional thing, and they took everybody who wanted to go.
Oh, that's
that we could
fantastic.
say we slept on the continent, and we have
Right.
no facilities. We're just out there in the snow with our tents and a little bit of supplies for the night.
Right. And perhaps, who knows, some liquid supplies as well to keep you warm, right? But, right.
Yeah, they kept most of that on the ship, unfortunately.
So outside of AGG and privacy law and background checks and outside of background screening and overnighting in Antarctica, what do you do for fun, activities or hobbies? What's happening when you're not, faced with privacy issues and legal compliance?
Yeah, well, as I was saying, travel is certainly a passion of mine, and so I do that whenever I can sort of make it work. But otherwise, my second interest is just my Siberian Huskies. I've got 2 Huskies currently, and I had 2 others before that, so 4 in total over the last almost 20 years.
Oh,
and
okay.
Hanging out with the Huskies is always fun and enjoyable.
That's great. And where's your next foreign trip? Where are you off to next?
I don't actually have something booked yet internationally. I had a trip to Armenia last November as part of a trip addressing a couple of other things, but Armenia was the new stop there, and that was fascinating and
Wow.
beautiful and lots of history there. I don't have one actually on the books. There's a chance that some friends will be going on a trip to Ireland, and so we might join in for that. I've been to Ireland previously, but this would be a trip potentially with a group of friends, and so we're just sort of seeing how that's going to play out.
So the Ring of Clonari and Kiss the Barney Stone and
Yeah, I've
tour
never
the
actually
Guinness
done
Factory.
Never actually done the Blarney Stone. I may or may not have been to a Guinness factory on a prior trip, but
Right.
but I haven't kissed the Blarney Stone yet.
All right. It's not as exciting as it sounds, but and bring plenty of sanitizer with you. You want to make sure you don't catch anything. Well, time to play a game we call Fun Facts. Can you tell us something about yourself unrelated to screening that people may not know or realize, or that maybe you've kept hidden, whatever it is it might be?
Well, fairly embarrassing story. My handwriting is, how should we say, not good. And so when I went to college, which was before sort of social media times, the school had a literal Facebook, not the website, but a Facebook where they collected, they had photos of all the incoming students, and there was an opportunity for a little bio to, a little questionnaire that they asked. And I filled it out by hand. And at the time, I was interested in coin collecting because I'm just that sort of geek. And so I put coin collecting on there, and the handwriting didn't translate well. So when the book came out, it appeared in the book as cow collecting.
Cow collecting.
The I and the N, I guess, it read to the person that was doing it as a W. So here I was, a kid coming from a small farm town, now getting questions about, what is cow collecting? My handwriting, sadly, has not materially improved since then, so I prefer typed communications, but there's a fun and embarrassing fact.
So you have a doctor's handwriting. So Kevin Coy, JD, privacy expert, and cow collector. You heard it here, folks. Right. So don't have a cow or whatever other bad jokes come to mind. All right. Well, Kevin, it has been great. Given your experience in the industry and the the length and breadth of cases and situations and clients that you've advised and issues, what's your advice for someone who is either thinking about entering the profession or they've been in it for a few years and trying to figure out how to get ahead or whether to stay or what to do? From your vantage point, what you've seen, what would be your advice?
Well, I think there, and my vantage point, may be a little different than some of the other guests that you'd have, just because I'm working, in the private firm perspective, as opposed to the operational trenches within a screener directly. But I think that I would say, you mentioned PBSA earlier. I would look for opportunities to network and engage there, to broaden your connections, broaden your contacts, your exposure to different firms, different options as to, what might be out there in the industry and how the industry is evolving. Right. And similarly, if you're trying to break into the industry, also a good opportunity to do it, to meet folks and connect that way.
That's good
as well
advice.
as the various PBSA committees are also if traveling to the conferences doesn't quite work, joining the committees is also a way to build up contacts in the industry.
I mean, that's great advice. With a lot of mergers and acquisitions, people who used to go to conferences when they were with smaller firms may not go now. And one solution to that, if you can't get the authorization to go or the firm won't pay for it, at least you can join the committee. And the committees are all done remotely, right?
Yeah,
you've been on or chaired committees.
Yeah, I've participated on the Educational Resources Committee here in the U.S. for many years now. And as you mentioned, chaired it at one point. But if education is, and I know that if education is your area of interest, that committee is always looking for new folks for help. But there are a number of other committees as well. And so depending on what the person's interest is, lots of opportunities. Most of the committees only meet maybe once or twice a month. They might have need for specialized subgroups or task forces for other things. So, depending on how much time you have to commit, you could potentially just spend an hour or two a month or more if you've got more time to give.
I think you and I were on the same program together separately. There was a Back to Basics series. And I did one of the sessions, sort of an introduction to background check. And as I recall, you did the FCRA legal compliance.
Yeah, I did one of the introductory FCRA sections. They broke that series out into as you mentioned, Les, into several different components. I did sort of the FCRA 101 introductory concepts type of presentation. I think that's still up on the PBSA website for members to access if anyone's interested.
Yeah, I think it's and for those who aren't familiar with it, it's a 5-part series. It's only 5 hours. And, I really have this philosophy that everyone, has the ability to increase their value regardless of, if they're paid for it or if it's on their own time, that your value is based upon how you increase value. You have to make yourself valuable. And that's a great series, not just because you and I were speakers, but despite that, I guess maybe in my case at least. But all right.
No, you were great, despite me. But yeah, lots of good resources there to consider for PBSA members that might be listening.
That's great. Let me give you the final opportunity. Any other thoughts you'd like to share before we sign off?
Oh, nothing groundbreaking there, Les, but just really thank you very much for the invitation. It's been fun. I've enjoyed the opportunity to participate.
Well, thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, our guest today has been Kevin Coy, Esquire, attorney at law, member of AGG, and a longtime expert on FCRA legal compliance privacy. And thanks for being on the show and sharing the time with us.
Thanks, Les. Happy to join you.
Excellent. All right. That was yet another wonderful conversation with a background screening pro. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss an update. And hey, if you got a moment, we'd love for you to leave us a review. It really helps get the word out. For more info or to catch up on past episodes, or to make suggestions or to suggest possible future guests, head over to our website. Once again, this is your host, Les Rosen, and it's been a pleasure to bring you another episode. See you on the next episode. Thanks.